Give us your thesis here. What do these people want, all the way from the Koch Brothers Industries and George Mason's bought university to the Congress and to the federal courts? What kind of society do they want? What do they want to destroy specifically?
Right. Well, this libertarian vision shared by Charles Koch and James Buchanan, the economist you mentioned, and the top operatives who are architects of this effort, would like to bring into being a libertarian society. Their libertarian utopia would have no place for essentially the kinds of changes that citizen action has won over the course of the 20th century, really from the progressive era forward. Things like government regulation of corporations to stop pollution, discrimination, lack of product safety, to undercut workers' power to organize together for collective voice, to undercut social insurance like Social Security and Medicare. So it is really an absolutely sweeping vision. It is stunning that anyone would imagine trying to impose this in the modern world, because it is such an unpopular vision when people understand it. Only about 3 or 4% of the population at the most identifies with libertarian thought. But because of the money that the Koch donor network has and has been able to amass with their hundreds of other donors who have contributed to this, it is actually feasible for them to try to alter the course of our country. And so what I take to be the most significant of my findings is the repeated statement by Charles Koch, by Buchanan, by other key figures in this project that they are acting in the way that they are acting precisely because they understand that they are a permanent minority, that they will never persuade the majority of the population of their ideas in an open contest of ideas.
But
and
you point out
they rely on
book.
a stealth strategy, to promote the myth of voter fraud. Right, okay.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. But you point out in your book that it's more than traditional libertarianism, because it's not Ron Paul type libertarianism. Ron Paul does not want concentration of power in a few hands. It seems to be a masked type libertarianism for plutocratic-driven policies and actions. They really want power in a few hands. That's not what libertarians want.
Well, they would say that they don't, of course, but their actions suggest very much that they do, and we can see what the combined operations that are Koch-funded have done to our country, particularly since the 2010 midterms. You were mentioning the 2018 midterms coming up, but since that period, they have won control over 30 states of the country, obviously over all branches of national government, and in every part of that power structure, they have been pushing measures that undermine the power of ordinary people, particularly workers, consumers, civil rights, feminists, etc., and exaggerate the power of corporations. So I quite agree with you that it's a kind of pseudo-libertarianism, but at the same time, I think it is important to point out that they have, through their monies, co-opted all the major institutions of libertarianism. All the formal institutions of libertarianism in this country now are dominated by Koch monies, Koch network monies, and are pushing this kind of agenda, from the Cato Institute to the Reason Foundation, the Independent Institute, and on and on and on, and of course ALEC and the other groups you mentioned.
Well, one thing about the Koch brothers is they speak with forked tongues. For example, they put ads in newspapers that they're against corporate welfare, what they call crony capitalism, namely taxpayer subsidies, handouts, giveaways, bailouts of business, like the Wall Street bailout. But then on the other hand, they're taking all kinds of corporate welfare. I mean, they have a gigantic conglomerate deep in the tar sands, oil and gas in Canada and elsewhere. They have tried to tax solar energy panels by pushing bills in legislatures in the South. They haven't been very successful with that. So they don't really walk the talk. They do say that they're for civil liberties and LGBT rights and so forth, but they don't really walk the talk. They have never challenged the military budget, which is full of waste of taxpayer resources. Ron Paul has challenged the military budget. They want to close off access to the courts, therefore restriction on tort, wrongful injury, lawsuits, for example. Ron Paul wants to open up access. So I like this to have the language really focus on corporatism. This is about corporatism. They say they're against statism, but they're not. They want the government to serve and enrich them and to deny and impoverish the mass of the people. Don't you think that's really their approach?
Well, I think the freedom that really matters to them is economic freedom, right? And this is a cause that is about economic liberty. And I describe it in the book as being committed to property supremacy in their application of these ideas. And so the idea is that the rights of property or corporations should trump other rights, human rights, such as, the right to be free from discrimination in the workplace, or environmental protections, such as the right to clean air and water, and so forth. So I like to think of it as property supremacy, and I think that is a helpful way of seeing it. I will say I think there is a tendency on the left to not take them seriously as ideologues. And a lot of these guys aren't. A lot of these guys are on the gravy train for what they can get from it. But I do believe that Charles Koch is a serious ideologue and a serious intellectual in his way, who has been studying ideas for 6 decades now. He's been funding hundreds of libertarian intellectuals trying to find a way to break through with this strategy. And I think that we have to take the ideas on their merits and challenge the ideas directly. And I say that also because they are reaching out in an unprecedented way to young people in particular. They have so much money that they are pushing into campuses, they are funding faculty positions, they are creating centers, and they are bringing thousands of young people into paid internships, into positions in this system, and they're doing that actually even calling themselves the Freedom Movement. So I think that it's crucial to really dig into the ideas themselves and show how the libertarianism promoted by the Kochs has actually become a deadly dogma. And I think we see that most obviously in their funding of climate science denial and misinformation.
They seem to be on a self-destruction path, because if they get rid of Social Security, Medicare, they get rid of government health and safety regulation, they change the tax system so they're rarely taxed, although they're pretty low taxed at the present time, and they basically undermine the democratic pillars of a society, they're going to shrink the economy. They're going to shrink consumer demand. They don't want a living wage. Well, a living wage means people have more money to spend to buy the products of the plutocracy and the oligarchy. So doesn't that sink into them that authoritarian regimes almost invariably have lower GDP per capita than stronger democracies? I mean, that's been true historically all over the world. And if Charles Koch is such an intellectual, and he's got 3 engineering degrees from MIT, number one, don't they understand that historically and economically? And number two, if they were really libertarians, they would debate the other side. They would debate progressives. So 2 questions. Don't they understand that they are basically cutting the roots of economic prosperity, which produces the quantitative amount of their profits? And why haven't they engaged the other side in debates? Have they debated you, for example?
Okay, so 2 things. One is, as I said before, I believe that these ideas, could be fertile, could be useful to think with. But at this stage, given the way they're being funded by this huge Koch donor network and this apparatus of literally hundreds of organizations, if you include the state and the international ones, it has become a deadly dogma. And I quite agree with you that it is leading to an utterly unsustainable society. Certainly environmentally, in that we have a small window to act on what's happening to our planet, but also economically, socially, in public health terms, and I believe, frankly, psychically, this would be an untenable society. But no, they seem not to understand this, and I think by the crudest measure, in terms of their ability to continue profiting, it's important to recognize that they no longer look to nation states, right? They don't care, frankly, about what happens to American workers or American communities, because they're looking to a vast world, to all the millions of consumers in China. You mentioned Brazil and other places, and I think they can flourish there. And as I suggest in the conclusion, they've been quite clear that they think America will reach the point when we have Brazilian-style favelas in our cities, and we have water of the quality of Flint in other places, and clearly they don't care because they think that will create the incentives and the drive to reinvent capitalism. I think it's insane, and that's why I'm spending so much time traveling around and speaking out against it. But I think they believe in it 100%. Now, I will say they do like to debate, but they like to debate in frivolous terms. They like to debate these ideas about as honestly and in good faith as they debate climate science.